Terrence Jordan was 41 days from losing the only home his granddaughter had ever known. He was 63 years old. He worked 3 jobs, and that week he was $83 short. Nobody knew. That was the part that would have broken most people, the not telling, but Terrence had spent his whole life carrying things quietly, so to him the silence was just another kind of work. Not his neighbours knew. Not the men he had served with in the Navy 30 years ago. Not a single supervisor at any of the 3 places where he showed up before dawn and left after dark without ever once asking for a favour. And definitely not his younger brother. Michael Jordan found out on a Tuesday evening from a phone call he almost let go to voicemail. By Wednesday afternoon he was already in Savannah. By the end of that week he had a plan, and it was not the kind of plan where a wealthy man writes a check and drives home feeling generous. It was the kind of plan where you take apart the machine that put your brother in that position, one bolt at a time, so quietly that Terrence would never know his little brother had been the one holding the wrench. Here is what Michael did not know yet. The company that owned Terrence's building, Marsh Oak Holdings, was not simply a careless landlord letting a property fall apart. It was running a system. A patient, deliberate, well-lawyered system built to squeeze long-time tenants until they broke, then push them out and replace them with people who could pay twice as much. Terrence was not the only one. There were 9 other households in that building alone, most of them people who had lived there 15 or 20 years, all of them being billed a monthly capital recovery surcharge that appeared on no lease any of them had signed. The man who ran Marsh Oak had been doing versions of this for 7 years across the coast of Georgia, and he had never once been held accountable. Over the next 3 weeks, in the unhurried way that Michael Jordan does everything that actually matters, that was going to change. The call came at 6:52 on a Tuesday. Michael was in his Charlotte office, finishing the last of 2 long meetings about the Hornets and a summer development plan for a rookie who could not yet shoot from the left corner. His assistant had gone home an hour earlier. The building had settled into that particular after-hours quiet that used to unsettle Michael when he was young, back when stillness felt like standing still, and standing still felt like losing. He had made a kind of peace with it. The name on the screen made him sit forward. Curtis Ellison. Everyone in their old neighborhood called him Books, because as a kid he had read every paperback the corner store threw out. Michael and Books had learned to ride bikes on the same cracked street on the west side of Wilmington. They had not spoken in nearly 2 years. Not because anything had gone wrong between them, but because that is what happens when one man's life becomes a machine that runs around the clock, and the other man stays rooted in the place they both came from. Michael answered on the 3rd ring. "Books," he said. "It has been a while." The pause on the line told him something before a single word did. "Mike," Books said, and his voice had the careful shape of a man who had rehearsed this and still did not know how to begin. "I would not call you out of nowhere if I did not think you needed to hear it. It is about Terrence." Michael leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "Tell me," he said. Books ran a barber shop on the corner of Anchor and 36th in Savannah, had for 19 years, and he knew everyone who passed his window by name and by the rhythm of their week. He told Michael what he had seen that morning. Terrence in his mechanic's coveralls, still smelling of diesel from the bus yard, standing in the little grocery 2 doors down, counting coins on the counter. $83 short of the money order he was trying to buy. The way he had set the whole thing aside without meeting anyone's eyes and walked out into the heat. And the folded paper that had slipped from his back pocket by the door, which Books had picked up after he left. A notice from Marsh Oak Holdings. Final demand before filing. Balance due $4,210. Michael did not speak for a moment. Then he asked 3 questions. He got 3 answers he did not want. He thanked Books, told him he had done exactly the right thing, and hung up. He sat without moving for 51 seconds. Then he opened his laptop and typed in the address of Del Rio Court on Anchor Street. The photos loaded slowly, and each one was worse than the last. Rust bleeding down the stucco, a stairwell railing wrapped in duct tape, a window air conditioner held in place with a length of rope, reviews mentioning black mould, a boiler that failed every winter, a management company that answered the phone only when rent was late. This was where his brother had been living. This was where a girl of 16 went to sleep every night. Michael did not make any more calls. He did not tell his staff. He drove home and he stood a long time in his kitchen holding a photograph he kept in a drawer. 2 boys on a dirt lot with a bent rim nailed to a telephone pole, the older one holding the younger one up by the waist so he could reach. On the back, in their father's careful hand, was the year 1974. James Jordan had built half the things in that photograph with his own hands, including the confidence in the smaller boy's face. Michael thought about the last real conversation he had ever had with his father. Not the public version, not the one he told at banquets. The quiet one, in a hospital corridor, when his father had taken his hand and said, "Look after Terrence. He carried you before you could carry yourself. Do not let the world make you forget that." Michael had promised, and then the years had come, the championships, the businesses, the sneakers on the feet of children in countries he would never visit, and somewhere in all of it the promise had gone soft and quiet and been filed away like a document nobody opens. He had not broken it in any single moment he could point to. He had broken it the way most promises are broken, slowly, without noticing one unreturned call at a time. He did not sleep that night. By 5:10 the next morning, he was on the interstate, heading south, 4 hours of highway with the radio off and the windows up. Nothing but the road and the weight of a debt he had let himself forget he owed. He thought about the winter their father lost his job, and Terrence, 17, had quietly turned down a technical scholarship to a school 2 states away so he could take a night shift at the paper mill and keep the lights on, so that 4 years later there would still be a house for his little brother to leave from. Terrence had never once mentioned it. Not at their father's funeral, not at their mother's, not in any of the polite holiday phone calls that had grown shorter every year. Michael took the Anchor Street exit at 9:06. He drove past Del Rio Court once without slowing. Then he parked 3 blocks away, walked back, and stood on the far sidewalk in the full morning light. It was worse in person. The photographs had not caught the smell, wet plaster and something chemical under it, the kind of smell that gets into the walls and stays. They had not caught the sound of a child's window unit rattling in its frame, like it was trying to shake itself loose. And they had not caught the handwritten sign taped to the mailboxes, "No cash accepted, online portal only," in a building where half the residents almost certainly did not have a reliable connection or a bank account that made the portal free. Michael stood there a long time. Then he walked 2 blocks to a diner called the Blue Heron, took a corner booth, ordered coffee he did not drink, and opened his phone. He did not call lawyers yet. He did not call his business team. He called 3 people who had once worked in property management along the Georgia coast, 2 former tenants he found through public housing complaint records, and a city code inspector named Ines Ramos, who over 4 years had filed 7 separate violation reports against Marsh Oak properties, none of which had ever led to a single consequence. 7 reports, 0 action. He wrote down the name of the company's director, Vaughn Delacroix. He searched it and found the headshot on the Marsh Oak website, a man in his early 60s with silver at the temples and the particular expression of someone who has never once been told no by anyone whose opinion he was required to respect. There was a line on the company's about page, "We do not manage buildings, we unlock their potential." Michael read it twice. Then he closed his phone and finished his cold coffee. He had seen enough. What Vaughn Delacroix did not know, sitting in his office 11 blocks away that morning, was that he was about to have the worst 3 weeks of his professional life, and that it would begin with a meeting he was certain he controlled. The offices of Marsh Oak Holdings occupied the top floor of a restored brick building on River Street, with tall windows that looked out over the water and the container ships sliding upriver toward the port. Clean lobby. Leather chairs the colour of good whiskey. A receptionist who smiled in the way receptionists smile when they are deciding, in the first 3 seconds, how much of their employer's time a person deserves. Michael wore what he always wore when he did not want to be recognised. A dark cap pulled low, a plain grey jacket, jeans and a pair of white sneakers with a small scuff on the left toe. He carried nothing but his phone and a folded sheet of paper, a printout of Terrence's notice that Books had photographed and sent him. He told the receptionist he was there about a tenant matter at Del Rio Court. She asked whether he had an appointment. He said he did not. She picked up the phone, spoke quietly, and turned back to him with her smile dialed down several degrees. "Mr. Delacroix keeps a full calendar," she said. "If you leave your name, someone from tenant relations will reach out within 5 to 7 business days." Michael nodded slowly and looked around the lobby. 2 other people waited in the leather chairs. A young woman with a manila folder pressed flat against her knees, her shoulders held rigid. An older man in a maintenance uniform, who kept turning his phone over and over in his hands without looking at it. Both of them had the look of people who had been waiting a very long time, and had stopped expecting anything good to come of it. Michael sat down by the window and waited. 39 minutes passed. The young woman was called in. She came out 11 minutes later, with the manila folder still unopened, her face arranged into the careful blankness people wear when they are working hard not to let anyone see what they feel. She left without meeting a single pair of eyes. 20 minutes after that, the man in the maintenance uniform was called in. He came out in 8, sat back down, and stared at his dark phone screen. At the 1-hour mark, the receptionist told Michael that Mr. Delacroix could give him a few minutes if he could be brief. He said he appreciated it. Vaughan Delacroix's office had the river view and a wall of framed civic awards, a Chamber of Commerce plaque, a photograph of him turning a ceremonial shovel of dirt beside 2 men in suits. He was standing when Michael came in, already glancing at his watch, a gesture so worn smooth by repetition that it had become a language, a way of telling a visitor that his time was already running out before he had said a word. He looked at Michael the way men like him look at men in caps and scuffed sneakers, a fast appraisal, a quiet conclusion. Not a partner, probably a complaint. Nothing that required the full weight of his attention. "Sit," Delacroix said, gesturing at the chair across the desk without looking up from a document he was pretending to read. "What can I do for you?" "I am here about a tenant at Del Rio Court," Michael said. "Unit 12. The filing that is about to go through." Delacroix set the document down. His face rearranged itself into something practiced and patient, the expression of a man who has had this exact conversation 100 times and knows precisely how it ends. "And your relationship to the tenant?" he asked. "He is family," Michael said. Delacroix nodded once and opened a folder at the corner of his desk, running a finger down a column of numbers with the efficiency of someone who processes people the way a sorting machine processes envelopes. "The account in Unit 12 is 4 months behind," he said pleasantly. 4,200 and change once you include the capital recovery surcharge and the utility reconciliation. We have sent 4 notices. There has been no payment plan requested, no contact of any kind. At this stage, the filing is simply procedural. Michael looked at him steadily. "That capital recovery surcharge," he said. "What is it for?" "Building improvements," Delacroix said. "It is disclosed in the tenant handbook." "The handbook," Michael repeated. "Not the lease." "The handbook is incorporated into the lease by reference," Delacroix said, and for the first time a small note of impatience touched his voice. "Page 9, Section 4. Michael let a silence open up and sit there. "Del Rio Court has 11 open code violations on file with the city," he said. "The boiler on the north side has not been serviced in 3 years. The stairwell lighting failed a safety inspection twice. That is all documented. And you are billing those tenants a surcharge for improvements nobody can point to." Something shifted behind Delacroix's eyes. A recalibration. He was looking at Michael a little differently now. still dismissive, but with a new thread of caution woven through it. The way a man looks when he realizes the person across the desk has done more homework than the chair he is sitting in would suggest. "Those items are on our capital schedule," he said smoothly. "We manage a large portfolio. Sequencing is a necessity, not a choice." "I would like to arrange a plan to clear the balance," Michael said. "A reasonable timeline." Delacroix leaned back. "At this stage, our policy does not allow modifications," he said. "The process is in motion. It has to run its course." "Your policy," Michael said. "Our policy," Delacroix answered and smiled briefly. "I understand it is frustrating, but we have obligations to our lender and to the other residents. We cannot make exceptions." Michael did not react. He looked at Delacroix long enough that the quiet became mildly uncomfortable, and then he stood and lifted his jacket from the back of the chair. "Thank you for your time," he said. Delacroix had already returned to his document. "Of course. Best of luck to your family." Michael paused at the door with one hand on the frame, not turning around. "One more thing," he said. "How many units in the Del Rio building are under filing right now?" "That is proprietary," Delacroix said, without looking up. Michael walked out. He rode the elevator down alone. In the lobby, the man in the maintenance uniform was still sitting in the leather chair, still turning his phone in his hands. Michael stopped beside him. "You waiting on Delacroix?" he asked. The man looked up. "Fourth time this month," he said. "Mold in my kids' room. They keep telling me a specialist will call. Nobody ever calls." Michael reached into his jacket, took out a plain white card with nothing on it but a phone number, and set it on the arm of the chair. "Call that Monday morning," he said quietly. "Say Del Rio Court, say your unit, they will know what to do." The man looked at the card, then up at Michael, and for the first time he really looked, and something in his face moved toward a thing he had almost forgotten how to feel. But Michael was already walking toward the door. What Delacroix could not have known, up in his office, congratulating himself on another nuisance handled with efficiency, was that the quiet man in the cap had spent 6 hours that morning pulling every housing complaint ever filed against Marsh Oak, had spoken to 3 former tenants, and had just Inspector Jordan to pay your payment plan. The payment plan was no longer what he was interested in. Terrence Jordan got home from his overnight shift at the bus yard at 6:11 on a Saturday. He always took the stairs. The elevator at Del Rio Court had been out since March, and nobody who lived there wasted hope on it anymore. He climbed the 3 flights slowly, his right knee catching the way it had caught every morning since a bad landing in the service 30 years back, and he was thinking about nothing more complicated than getting his boots off and sleeping 4 hours before his shift at the tire shop. He almost stepped on the envelope before he saw it, the Marsh Oak logo in the corner. He recognized it without opening it. He had received 4 of them now, each one a little more formal than the last, each one carrying a number that had somehow grown larger, while his own effort had stayed exactly the same. He picked it up, stood outside the door of Unit 12 for a moment, then let himself in, set it on the kitchen table with the others, and sat down in the chair by the window. The morning light came in grey and flat over the marsh. His granddaughter Naya's backpack hung on the hook by the door, dark green, with a small brass compass keychain her grandmother had given her before she passed. Nia was at a study group that morning, and Terrence was glad of it. Glad she was not there to see the stack of envelopes. Glad she was not there to watch her grandfather sit in the grey light and run the same arithmetic he had run 100 times. 3 jobs, 67 hours a week, and still $4,000 short of staying, a number that grew a little each month no matter how many hours he added, because the surcharge grew faster than a man could work. Terrence was not someone who came apart easily. He had done 2 deployments, had held pressure on wounds with both hands, had folded flags and handed them to widows and driven home afterward without a word. He had learned long ago how to set himself apart from the thing that was hurting him and just keep moving. It was a survival skill, and it had never once failed him. But that morning, in that chair, in that light, with that stack of paper, He felt something in his chest crack open, just slightly, just enough. He sat with it. Then he got up, made a pot of coffee, and started getting ready for the afternoon. He did not call anyone. He never did. Michael had been back in Charlotte for 2 days when Books called again. They set the court date, he said. 3 weeks from Thursday. Michael was standing at his kitchen window. He set down his cup. "How is he asked. Books was quiet a moment. "You know Terrence," he said, still showing up, still saying nothing. Michael nodded to himself. He had expected that. In a strange way, he had been counting on it, not because his brother's pride made things easier, but because it was the one fixed point he could build around. Terrence would not ask. Terrence would not take a check. Terrence would not let his little brother sweep in and solve his life with money, the way money solves most things when a person has enough of it, which meant Michael would have to build something his brother could not refuse. Something that did not look like charity. Something that looked like the world simply, finally, working the way it was supposed to. He had spent the last 2 days doing 3 things. First, he had his attorney pull every public record tied to Marsh Oak Holdings, business filings, deeds, housing court appearances, and code histories across all 14 properties in their portfolio. Second, he had spoken at length with Ines Ramos, the inspector whose 7 reports had gone nowhere, and learned that every one of them had been quietly closed by a supervisor who golfed twice a month with a member of the Marsh Oak Board. Third, he had a long conversation with a woman named Dorothy Pruitt, who ran a small outfit called Coastal Tenants United, and who had been building a case against Marsh Oak for 2 years, only to hit the same wall every single time. The wall had a name. Delacroix had a county commissioner and a housing authority supervisor in his corner, and Dorothy had the emails to prove it, but never the leverage to force anyone to act on them. Michael listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he asked her one question. If the leverage existed, he said, "Would you be ready to move?" She did not hesitate. "We have been ready for 2 years," she said. Michael called his attorney, a man named Nathaniel Greer, who had worked beside him for 21 years, and had long ago stopped being surprised by anything his client asked. "Nate," he said, "I need you to make a call to a company called Marsh Oak Holdings, not as my attorney, as a potential investor. I want to know whether Vaughan Delacroix would be open to discussing the sale of his residential portfolio." A pause on the line. "This about the Del Rio situation?" Nathaniel asked. "It is about several things at once," Michael said. "Give me a day," Nathaniel said. Michael hung up and stood at the window looking out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, in boardrooms and on golf courses and over dinners with good wine, there were men like Delacroix running numbers on human beings, deciding which families were worth keeping and which were worth filing against, adding surcharges to surcharges until the filing turned inevitable, and the machine kept right on turning. He thought about the young woman with the unopened folder. He thought about the man with mold in his child's room. He thought about a green backpack and a brass compass. He thought about a promise made in a hospital hallway. Then he picked up the phone and made one more call. Nathaniel called back in 18 hours. Delacroix took the meeting, he said. Day after tomorrow, 2 o'clock. He believes he is talking to an investment group out of Charlotte. I may have suggested we are looking to acquire a significant footprint in the coastal Georgia market. And when he learns who the investor actually is, Michael said. Then, Nathaniel said, and allowed himself a small pause, we will find out what kind of man he is. Michael drove back to Savannah the next morning, dressed the same way he always dressed, when he was not trying to be anyone in particular. He reached the Marsh Oak offices 20 minutes early, and sat in the same chair by the window he had sat in 6 days before. The same receptionist was at the desk. She did not recognize him. At 2 o'clock exactly, Nathaniel Greer came through the door carrying a leather briefcase, dressed in the way attorneys dress when they want a room to understand immediately where the advantage lies. He shook Michael's hand with the practiced neutrality of a man meeting a client for the first time. They were shown up together. Delacroix was standing when they entered, and this time his full attention was engaged, a completely different posture from the distracted half-presence of the week before. He had a second man with him, younger, introduced as his director of operations. There were bottles of water on the table. Someone had squared the chairs. Delacroix extended his hand to Nathaniel first, then turned to Michael. The recognition came in stages. First confusion, a slight narrowing of the eyes, the look of a man who knows he has seen a face before and cannot place it against the wrong background. The cap, the jacket, nothing about the frame matched the picture. Then a slow repositioning, his eyes moving to Nathaniel and back, the first tremor of a man whose footing has just gone soft beneath him. And then Nathaniel set the briefcase on the table, clicked it open, and laid 3 documents flat on the surface. The first was a letter of intent, a formal offer to purchase the entire residential portfolio of Marsh Oak Holdings in Chatham County. The number at the bottom was specific, not round, the kind of number that comes from a person who has done the actual math. The second was a detailed property condition report, covering all 14 buildings, assembled from public complaints, city inspection records, and tenant testimony gathered over the previous 72 hours. The third was a single sheet, Del Rio Court, Unit 12, eviction filing, case number listed at the top. Delacroix stared at the third document for a long moment. Then he looked up at Michael. "Mr. Delacroix," Nathaniel said, "I would like to introduce my client, Michael Jordan, owner of the Charlotte Hornets, and as of this morning the named party in a formal offer to acquire your portfolio." The room went very quiet. The director of operations had gone completely still. Michael looked at Delacroix without any particular expression. He did not smile. He did not lean forward. He sat in his chair the way he had always been able to sit, utterly at rest, the way only people who are entirely certain of their footing can sit. And he waited. That refusal to perform anything, no triumph, no anger, no urgency, was somehow the most unsettling thing in the room. Delacroix had prepared for something he could push against, a threat, a demand, an emotion he could match. There was nothing to push against. "Mr. Jordan," Delacroix said at last. His voice was steady, but only because he was holding it that way. "This is unexpected. I am not certain I understand the nature of your interest in my portfolio." Michael glanced at the third document. "I think you understand exactly the nature of my interest," he said. Delacroix's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Nathaniel. "This offer," he said, "it is contingent on what?" Nathaniel opened the briefcase again and produced a fourth document, thicker than the others. "Among other terms," he said, "the immediate withdrawal of every pending eviction filing across the portfolio, a funded remediation schedule for all outstanding code violations, executed within 90 days. The elimination of the capital recovery surcharge and the utility reconciliation fee, with credits applied retroactively, and the dissolution of the rent-to-own program currently marketed to residents over the age of 60. That last item," Delacroix said, and his voice had developed an edge, "is a legitimate homeownership pathway." Michael spoke then, quietly, without raising his voice at all. "Your homeownership pathway," he said, "requires a resident to make 48 consecutive on-time payments and voids the entire accumulated equity on a single late one." He let that sit. "You have enrolled 19 seniors. Not one has ever reached month 48. He paused. 2 of them died, still believing they were buying their homes. Delacroix did not answer. "One of your tenants," Michael went on, "has been filing mold reports for 14 months. You have documentation of everyone. There has been no remediation. He has a 9-year-old with asthma. Another resident, a widow, was charged a lease break fee of $900 for leaving a unit that had no heat for 19 days in January. She paid it because she thought she had to. You have 11 active filings in Del Rio Court alone, and 9 of those households are current on their base rent. They fell behind on the surcharge. Your surcharge, he let that land. That is not a business model, Mr. Delacroix. That is a trap with a lease attached to it." The silence in the room had a different weight now. Delacroix folded his hands on the table and worked very hard to keep his face composed. "I would like a few minutes to consult with my operations director," he said. "Of course," Nathaniel said. "We will be in the lobby." They were in the lobby for 11 minutes. When Delacroix's assistant came to bring them back up, her face gave nothing away, but Michael noticed she did not meet either of their eyes in the elevator. Delacroix was standing at the window when they re-entered. He turned around slowly. "I am not prepared to accept the acquisition terms as written," he said, "but I am willing to discuss the eviction withdrawals and the remediation schedule as standalone items, separate from any sale." Michael looked at him steadily. "And the surcharge," he said, "and the rent-to-own program." Delacroix's chin lifted. "Those are not things I am in a position to contest in a single meeting." Michael nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Then we do not have anything else to discuss today," he said. He was almost at the door when Delacroix spoke again, and the polish had gone out of his voice. "You are making this personal." Michael stopped. He turned around slowly, and he looked at Delacroix for a long moment, not with anger, not with contempt, but with something quieter and more final than either. "I made my father a promise a long time ago," he said. "This is me keeping it." He held Delacroix's eyes. "You have spent 7 years telling yourself this was only business. That is the part I cannot help you with." He walked out. What happened in the 72 hours after that meeting was not dramatic. It did not take place in a courtroom or in front of any audience. It happened in offices and inboxes and phone calls, between people who had been waiting a very long time for the right conditions. Dorothy Pruitt at Coastal Tenants United had been ready for 2 years. Michael's attorney gave her what she had never had before: a formal complaint to the Georgia Real Estate Commission supported by tenant testimony and a financial analysis showing a coordinated pattern of surcharge manipulation across all 14 Marsh Oak properties. Not one building. 14. Ines Ramos, the inspector whose 7 reports had gone nowhere, filed an 8th. This time she sent a copy at the same moment to the State Attorney General's office and to 2 reporters at the Savannah Morning News who had been covering coastal housing for 3 years. And Nathaniel Greer quietly contacted the 3 commercial lenders who held Marsh Oak's mortgage lines and its largest line of credit, sending each of them the property condition report, along with a short note suggesting they might want to review their exposure before the Commission completed its inquiry. By Thursday evening, 2 of those lenders had placed Delacroix's credit under formal review and frozen a pending refinance he had been counting on to cover the winter. Delacroix did not know any of this yet. But the people who lived on Anchor Street were about to learn that somebody had finally been paying attention. The Georgia Real Estate Commission sent its first formal inquiry letter to Marsh Oak Holdings on a Monday morning, 17 days after Michael Jordan had walked out of Vaughn Delacroix's office. The assistant signed for the envelope at 9:03. By 9:45, Delacroix had called his attorney. By noon, his attorney had called him back with news that made the first call feel manageable. 2 of the 3 primary lenders had opened credit reviews and suspended the refinance. The Savannah Morning News had contacted the office for comment on a story about systematic fee manipulation in Chatham County rental housing. And the Attorney General's office had confirmed receipt of a complaint referencing all 14 buildings in the portfolio. Delacroix sat in his office with the river view and tried to locate the moment he had lost control. He kept arriving at the same answer and rejecting it, because the answer was a man in a cap and scuffed sneakers who had sat across from him and spoken without ever raising his voice, and then walked out of 2 meetings as though he had somewhere more important to be. His attorney called again at 3. The inquiry covers the surcharge structure and the rent-to-own program across the entire portfolio, he said. If the pattern holds up under examination, and based on what I am reading it will, we are looking at license revocation. Not suspension, revocation. There is more. 3 former tenants have submitted affidavits. One is the widow who paid the $900 fee. She kept every document, every email, every unanswered maintenance request. Clifton, this is not something we can settle quietly. What are the options? Delacroix asked. Your best option is voluntary cooperation, his attorney said. Withdraw the filings, fund the remediation, eliminate the surcharge, dissolve the senior program and refund what you can. Get ahead of the story before it runs. And if you do not, then the Commission conducts a full investigation. The lenders finish their reviews and call the loans. The Attorney General decides whether this rises to a pattern of predatory practice under the State Consumer Protection Statute. And the newspaper runs its story regardless of what you do. The line was quiet for several seconds. So the terms Michael Jordan put on that table, Delacroix said slowly. We're generous, his attorney said, given where you are standing now. Yes, Delacroix hung up. He sat a long time looking at the river. He thought about the letter of intent with its non-round number. About 4 documents laid flat on a conference table. About the way Jordan had looked at him, not with the heat of a man winning a fight, but with the calm of a man who had already won it before he walked in the door, and was simply waiting for everyone else to understand. He thought about what he had said. You are making this personal, and what Michael had answered. I made my father a promise. This is me keeping it. At 4:30 he called his attorney back. Tell them we will cooperate, he said. All of it. The filings, the remediation, the surcharge, the senior program. Everything. That is the right call, his attorney said. Delacroix did not answer that. He was looking at the river again, and he said, without a question mark, only 2 words sitting in the air of an empty office. Is it? He stayed at his desk long after dark, not working, just sitting with the particular weight of a man who has spent 7 years certain he was merely being smart, certain this was simply the way the world worked, and has just been shown in exhaustive and irrefutable detail that the people on the other side of that certainty had been paying a price he had never once let himself look at directly. He did not apologize. Not that night, not in the formal proceedings that followed. He cooperated fully, said the right words in the right rooms, signed the right documents. Somewhere in the architecture of that cooperation there was something that resembled accountability without quite reaching remorse. But there was one moment, documented only because Dorothy Pruitt happened to be standing in the corridor outside the commission hearing room when it happened. As Delacroix passed the small group of Del Rio Court residents who had come to testify, he slowed. He looked at the widow who had paid the $900 fee in a January with no heat. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the floor. Then he walked on. Dorothy said afterward it was the closest she had ever seen a man like him, come to understanding a thing he had spent a very long time not understanding. It was not enough, but it was something. The 11 filings at Del Rio Court were withdrawn on a Wednesday afternoon, 19 days after Michael had first stood on the far sidewalk in the morning light and looked up at his brother's window. Terrence Jordan found out the way he found out most things, from a notice slipped under his door. This one was different. No Marsh Oak letterhead. A single typed line from the housing court, confirming that the filing had been voluntarily withdrawn. He read it 3 times, standing in his socks in the hallway. Then he sat down on the floor, his back against the wall, and held the paper in both hands for a long time. He did not know why the filing had been dropped. He had no reason to connect it to anything, except perhaps the housing group whose number someone had left at the community centre front desk 2 weeks earlier, printed neatly on a plain white card with no name on it. He had called that number. They had been thorough and helpful and strangely unsurprised by everything he told them. They had asked him to document what he had, and he had. Beyond that, he did not know how the machine had been turned. He was too tired to ask too many questions. He was grateful in the bone-deep way. People are grateful when something terrible stops happening, and they can finally breathe. He picked himself up off the floor, made coffee, called Nia at the study group, and told her she could stop worrying now. He did not tell her why things were better. He only said that they were. 3 weeks after the commission filed its findings, a position opened at the newly restructured Del Rio court, now under the interim oversight of a non-profit housing organisation that Dorothy Pruitt had helped stand up, the Live Oak Opportunity Fund. The job was building manager, full-time, health benefits, a salary that was not lavish but was steady and real, and did not require a second or a third job to survive. The woman who called Terrence was named Patricia Vann. She said his name had come up through the community centre, that she had heard he was reliable, that he knew the building and its people, and cared about doing right by them. Terrence listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then he asked one question. "How did you get my number?" "A colleague passed it along," Patricia said. She did not have the colleague's name handy. Terrence took the job. He gave 2 weeks' notice at all 3 of his other positions the same week, the bus yard, the tyre shop, the overnight security, and thanked every supervisor properly, because that was Terrence. He started on a Monday. By Wednesday he had catalogued every open maintenance issue in all 22 units and handed Patricia's team a prioritised list. By Friday, the elevator had its first service appointment in 11 months. He did not make a thing of any of it. He just worked. Nia Jordan turned 17 that October. She had by then been wearing new shoes for 2 months, a pair of clean white sneakers that had appeared in a box outside Unit 12, on a Saturday morning in August, no note, no name, her size exactly. She had shown them to her grandfather, who had looked at them a moment with an expression she could not quite read, and then said only, "Someone who cares about you." She wore them to her first day at the community college downtown, where she was enrolled in an engineering program on a scholarship from an organisation she had never heard of before the acceptance letter came, the Live Oak Opportunity Fund, with an address listed as a law office on Bull Street. She looked the foundation up and found very little: a filing date, a short mission statement about economic access for working families in Chatham County, no donors and no directors anywhere on the public record. She thought about asking someone. She never quite got around to it. 8 months after the night Michael had first stood in the dark across from a lit window, on the 3rd floor, he drove back to Savannah on a Saturday in late November. He told no one he was going. He did not go to Del Rio Court this time. He drove out to the edge of the old industrial road where their father's repair garage had once stood, the cinder block building where James Jordan had taught both his sons to change a belt, and set a timing chain, and take pride in fixing what other people threw away. The garage had changed hands twice, and the current owner had painted the door a red neither Jordan boy would have chosen. But the hand-poured concrete apron out front was still there, cracked now, and the old workbench their father had built was still bolted to the side wall, visible through the open bay. Michael sat in the car a while. Then he got out and walked around to the side. Terrence was already there, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the bench through the open door the way you look at something that holds a large part of your life. He turned when he heard footsteps. He looked at Michael a moment without saying anything. "You knew," Terrence said. It was not a question. Michael stopped a few feet away. "Yeah," he said. "How long?" Terrence asked. "Since a Tuesday in the summer," Michael said. "Books called me." Terrence nodded slowly and looked back at the bench. "The elevator got fixed," he said. "Building is different now. Patricia's people, they actually fix things when you report them." He paused. "Nia got a scholarship." "I know," Michael said. Terrence turned to look at him then, really looked. "You did not have to do it the way you did it," he said. "Quiet, behind my back." Michael met his eyes. "Yeah, I did," he said. "You would have said no." Terrence almost smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I would have said no." The November air was cold and still. Somewhere down the road a dog was barking in a way that suggested it was not actually upset about anything. "You could have just called me," Terrence said. "I should have," Michael said. "Not about this, before this. I should have called for years. Dad asked me to look after you, and I let the distance grow because it was easy, and you carried all of it alone, and you never once said a word." He was quiet for a moment. I am not going to let that happen again." Terrence looked at him for a long time. Then he reached over to the bench, picked up an old socket wrench that had been sitting there through 2 owners and a coat of the wrong red paint, weighed it in his hand the way he had 1,000 times, and held it out. Michael took it. It was cold and familiar, and exactly the right weight, and for a second both men were 17 and 13 again, in a garage that smelled of oil and their father's coffee, learning the thing their father was really teaching, which was never about engines at all. They stood there a while, not saying much. Then they went to get something to eat, the way they had not done in 19 years, and they stayed at the table until the place closed. There is a thing that happens sometimes when a person ends up with far more than they need. A quiet forgetting. Not cruelty, just distance. The kind that grows between people, not because anyone chooses it, but because life moves fast and success moves faster, and before long the people who made you who you are have becomes in a phone you keep meaning to call. Michael Jordan won championships. He built companies. He put his name on shoes worn by children in countries he will never visit, and he almost let his own brother go under, 4 hours from his door, without ever knowing. The lesson here is not that success is wrong. The lesson is not really even about Michael. It is about Terrence. It is about the specific dignity of a man who works 67 hours a week and still cannot make the math come out right, and who would rather lose everything he has than ask for help from someone who loves him, because somewhere along the way, needing help had started to feel like failing. That confusion, the devastating one between struggle and shame, does not belong to Terrence alone. It lives inside far more people than any of us want to count. What Michael understood from the moment books described a man setting a money order back on a counter was that the only way to help someone who will not accept help is to remove the thing that made the help necessary in the first place. Not a check, a change. He did not just help his brother. He changed the conditions, and then he drove back to Charlotte and let Terrence believe he had carried himself, because that, in the end, was the last piece of the promise. To give a proud man his footing back without ever asking him to feel small for having lost it. I have spent a long time thinking about stories like this one. About brothers and about the particular silence of men who were raised to handle things. My own father did not ask for help easily. Neither did his. There is a whole generation of men, maybe more than one, who learned that needing something was the same as being less, who would rather wear a thing until it fell apart than admit that they were falling apart themselves. What stays with me here is not the accountability Delacroix finally faced, though that matters. It is the $83. It is the money order set quietly back on the counter. It is the decision a man makes in a small private moment nobody is supposed to see, to carry the whole weight alone rather than let it touch the people he loves. And it is the other decision, made by someone who loves him back, to quietly, patiently, with no audience and no credit, make sure that weight gets lighter. Not every act of love announces itself. Some of them just fix the elevator and drive home. So think about it for a moment. Is there someone in your life right now? Someone who was there before the distance? Someone who would never ask but might need it? You do not have to be Michael Jordan to change someone's conditions. Sometimes you just have to pay enough attention to notice. And remember this, because it is the whole of it. Dignity is not a privilege, it is a basic right. If this story moved something in you, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, and it helps these stories reach the people who need them most. And tell me in the comments, would you have done it the way Michael did, quietly, without ever letting your brother know, or would you have made the call directly, pride and pushback and all? There is no wrong answer, but I think your answer says something true about you, so do not keep it to yourself. This story is a work of fiction. Mike Jordan is a real person, but every event, character, conversation, and situation in this narrative is entirely imaginary, created for storytelling and to explore dignity, grace under pressure, and quiet courage. Nothing here represents actual events or should be read as fact.